Picture the scene. An 8-year-old boy, soaked by rain and shivering with cold, bursts into the gleaming hall of a mansion he knows he could never belong to. His name is Arthur, and all he wanted was a piece of bread for his sick little sister. But instead of kindness, he finds Gustavo, a millionaire with a heart as cold as ice, who doesn't think twice before shouting and kicking the boy out, even as he sees the desperation and tears streaming down Arthur's face. Arthur runs away, but leaves behind his only keepsake from his mother, an old, battered backpack. Gustavo is unsettled, but only later that night does he replay the security footage. And what he finds inside the backpack changes everything. What secret could make a rich man tremble with guilt at the sight of a simple street kid? You'll want to watch until the end to see just how far a heart can change when faced with a true story like this. Arthur is walking under a fine rain, sharp as a blade on the skin. He staggers along, trying to make himself small, to go unnoticed. People hurry by, not even glancing at him. Some pull their coats tighter, stepping aside, treating that little boy as if he were just part of the city's scenery on a bad night. His feet are at their limit, red, grimy, squishing water from the sidewalk's potholes. Every now and then he hops sideways, searching for the least cold spot, but there's nowhere to hide. Water seeps between his toes, chilling him to the bone. He clings to that backpack on his back, often pulling it around front like a shield whenever someone gets too close, guarding it as if it held everything precious. And to him, it does. Hair plastered to his forehead, dripping. His big eyes droop with exhaustion and worry. You can tell he doesn't cry, not because he's not sad, but because he's tired of wasting tears. Every feeling turns to silence. A car speeds by, splattering mud up his already filthy pants. He doesn't complain, doesn't look back. He's thinking of his sister. She should be sleeping by now, but he can't even be sure. Her fever comes every night. The worry presses down, his stomach aches, and he grips the backpack strap tighter. That foul smell of garbage and rotting food drifts from the drains. His chest tightens. Thought running through his mind. Will I bring something home today? He'd rummaged through 3 trash bins, but only found empty cans, soggy pizza boxes, nothing worth eating. For a moment, Arthur stops under an awning. There's an old man smoking there, giving him a dirty look. The unsaid, "Move along, this isn't your place." Arthur stands there just a second before seeing that look. He steps back into the rain, almost apologizing just for existing. Inside the backpack, besides an old rag from a life before, is his mother's photograph. Sometimes he thinks of her, misses her arms, the only warmth he knew. Now everything's cold. The street, the night, his stomach, the future. The city never really goes quiet, but when a bus drives past with its windows shut, Arthur hears that muffled silence, and his heart pounds. He hides a little behind a lamppost. Cars queue at the light, yellow and white beams staring at him in the wet pavement's reflection. He sees everything from below, as if watching the world through a fence. Somewhere, a siren wails, making Arthur jump and recoil further. He can't explain why, but the police never look at him with kindness. Not many people do. Some throw coins, others pretend he's not there. He's learned how to be small, how to make himself nothing, almost invisible as air. But inside him lives a scream, a longing to ask for help, or at least for bread. His fingers are numb. He looks at his hands, rubs them together for warmth, but the wind slaps the rain right back into his face. His nails are dirty, his palms rough from carrying too much. His stomach growls loudly. He tries to ignore it, tries not to think about it, but then he remembers his sister's tearful eyes, her pleas for water, for food. He thinks, I have to come back with something. I can't show up empty-handed. He zips his coat tight, even though it's soaked, smells the old, worn fabric, and remembers his mom again. Arthur finds an awning in front of a bakery, already closed. He stares at the dark display windows. Imagines the smell of fresh bread, dough being cut, the heat from the oven. Just remembering hurts more. He doesn't dare get too close. There's always someone watching. But hope and fear swirl together. Another gust of wind comes, and Arthur crouches, hugging the backpack to his chest as if embracing the most important person in the world. Anyone passing by would see just a small child huddled in the rain, but if they could see inside, they'd find almost a grown boy, dirty with courage, worn out from being ignored, but still clutching the few good memories he has left. Time drags. His toes barely bend anymore. Again, Arthur thinks the night will be long for his sister, and he won't, fail her. His tired face hardens, hiding the urge to cry with a strange sort of strength, one of someone who's already been beaten by life. The dark sky doesn't even threaten to lighten. Only the occasional flash of lightning and rumble that drowns out the low sobs of someone hurting on the inside. Arthur lifts his face, lets the rainwater wash his skin. It's hard to tell if they're tears or just the city making him invisible one more time. No one on the street asks his name. No one asks what he carries in that backpack. But he asks himself, would my mom even recognize me now? Do I still look like her son? The rain starts coming down harder again. He doesn't hesitate. He runs, trying to escape the cold, hoping to find somewhere he might get real food, or at least a shred of hope. Tonight's tough for everyone, but it's especially rough for a hungry kid trying to be brave. Even so, Arthur doesn't stop. He knows, in that backpack, right alongside his mother's photo, lives the last tiny spark of hope that things could change, even if just a little, even if it's just enough to save his sister for one more night. Arthur had been wandering for hours now, the wet backpack sticking to his back, socks full of holes already falling apart inside sneakers way too small. The cold bit at him, but it was the hunger that hurt most. It wasn't new, didn't start today, but standing on the sidewalk of that little grocery, with the gray sky falling on him again, it felt unbearable this time. He stood for a while, peering through the fogged glass. Inside, the owner was talking loudly on the phone, laughing at some joke as he fiddled with the register. People walked by without glancing at Arthur. An old lady adjusted her umbrella. A man with full shopping bags didn't notice the little eyes glued to the food behind the window. The scent of fresh bread drifted outside and seemed to mock him. To anyone passing by, he was just another street kid. But no one saw that hole inside him grow every time he thought of his sister, lying down, quietly moaning with hunger and fever. Arthur tried to work up the courage to ask, but he knew the owner's scowl too well. He'd already taken a beating around here once, for a lot less. And soaked, face dirty, he knew he'd be treated like trash. Better to make himself invisible. Deep breath, he tugged his tattered hood down and walked around to the side of the grocery, all the way to the back. The smell of mixed garbage hit him hard, twisting his stomach in another way. He dug through, tossing aside a cardboard lid. Nothing but ripped plastic bags, rotting fruit peels. A skinny cat was pawing through the boxes too, hunting scraps. Then, at the bottom of the bin, almost hidden beneath wilted lettuce leaves, Arthur saw 2 squashed rolls. Old, already hard, but still bread. He felt a sharp sting in his chest. He stood frozen for a few seconds, staring, shame burning his face. He remembered his mother's voice teaching right from wrong. But the ache of his sister's empty stomach went out. He looked around, still no one near the store. He snatched up the rolls quickly, trying not to make a sound. His hands trembled, half from cold, half from fear that someone might see. He shoved the bread into his backpack, the musty smell making him swallow his tears. His breaths came quick, loud, as if just being there was a crime. He knew it was wrong. But the image of his sister, cracked lips and tired eyes, came even stronger. Arthur wiped his runny nose on his sleeve, tasted the bitterness of guilt, and zipped up the backpack, squashing the bread even more. As he was leaving, his feet slipped on the slick ground. The wind picked up, rain pelting his hair, but stuck to his forehead. No hiding from his conscience, it felt like everything around was judging him. Even the noise of the traffic sounded harsher, louder. He swallowed hard, sat behind a wall for just a minute, looked at the bread. Old, hard, dirty, but it would be lunch for him and his sister. Arthur ran his fingers over the crumbs, as if apologizing to his mother, as if she could hear. He wanted to cry again, but had to swallow the tears. "Sorry, Mom," he muttered, sure no one was listening. Just then a dog passed by, rummaging through the garbage too. Arthur felt a sharp pang for the animal, but he couldn't share. The whole world seemed to be fighting for scraps, and even then, scraps were still fought over. He sat there for a few minutes, breathing slowly. Tried to remember his mother's face, one afternoon at the park, her still smiling even when tired from working in other people's houses. The longing bit him hard. He hugged the backpack, the only thing he had left from her, and carefully stored the bread inside, like it was the most precious thing in the world. Before standing up, he pressed his hand to his chest to hold back the tears. Looked up at the sky that wouldn't stop crying along with him. Thought about his sister asleep, needing it more than he did. That hurt, but it gave him a different kind of courage. Decided that, even if it was wrong, he'd keep fighting for her, because nobody else did. He got up slowly, feeling even colder, inside and out. He didn't look back anymore. Crossed the street, walked away from the back of the store, trying to stand tall, as if nobody knew. His face flushed with shame, his eyes wet, not only with rain. Down streets he could walk with his eyes closed, he went. People all rushed by, not noticing the little boy moving slowly, protecting his backpack like it was treasure. Only he understood what those stolen rolls weighed, not just hunger, but everything, guilt and hope together. As he walked, all he heard was the world moving on, as if he and his sister didn't even exist. But for him, every step was another chance at one more day together. He'd get home, break the hard bread in half, give the bigger piece to his sister, and make up a story just to see if she could muster a little smile. Because deep down, that was all he had to give. And all that really mattered. Arthur stumbled over the sidewalk, his soaked sneakers squeezing water between his toes. Rain beat down hard on his face, as though the sky made no difference between a child and a stray dog. He adjusted the old backpack on his shoulders, the strap nearly torn, but it was all he had left from his mom, and every step felt heavier. Cold gnawed at him, when slicing his thin cheeks. Passing cars sent up dirty spray, as if the city recoiled from his very presence. At first, Arthur didn't even see the mansion. He was so used to looking only at the ground, dodging trash, avoiding the eyes of rushed adults. Only when the smell hit him, new bread, baked cake, that real warmth that wakes your stomach, did he stop. His belly twisted, growling so loud he was embarrassed, even though no one was watching. He raised his head, slowly. His eyes locked onto the giant house. It looked like something out of a cartoon or a movie, a huge porch lit with golden lamps, windows spilling light from a busy kitchen. For a second, Arthur almost laughed. And there, surely nothing was lacking: food, blankets, someone asking if a child had eaten dinner. But then shame and fear crashed over him. He glanced around, felt rain running down his forehead, into the collar of his filthy shirt. No one on the street cared, just fast cars, closed windows. He gripped his backpack, teeth clacking from cold. He didn't even know why he lingered so long. Maybe because it was easier to dream of food than risk another rejection, to hear one more "get lost, kid." His hand landed on his stomach, without thinking. He thought of his sister waiting, her feverish, pleading eyes. He remembered his promise: "I'll be back soon, with something for us to eat." One step forward, then another, until he was at the gate. Black iron, heavy, with rounded points, always clean, the opposite of the other houses around, spray-painted and grimy. Arthur stood to the side, trying to see into the kitchen. A woman passed by with a dish. He caught only a glimpse of her tied-back hair, white apron. His heart thumped wildly. All he wanted was to ask for food, just that. All he wanted was to be invisible, just for another moment, just until he got a piece. But the gate was locked, of course. He looked both ways. Dark street, not a soul in sight. His hand shook, not just from the cold. His stomach screamed, his head seemed to beg, "Go, before someone sees." Still, he clung to the bars a while, just watching the other side. Then, again, the image of his sister shivering under the thin blanket. That's when something inside him snapped. He left his backpack on the wall, climbed without a second thought. Scraped his knee on iron, his pants caught, but he tugged them free. He was light. Nothing could stop a starving 8-year-old. He jumped. The landing thudded softly into the giant, rain-soaked lawn. The smell grew stronger. Oh, that smell of home, of good things, things he barely remembered anymore. Arthur crouched low, holding his breath. He feared dogs, security guards, anyone seeing and yelling. But nothing. Just the sound of rain on leaves, soaked lawn, warm lights, warming everything except him. He crept near the stained glass window at the back. He could hear clattering pans. Arthur caught a quick glimpse of his reflection. Tired face, muddy smear on his forehead, deep shadows under his eyes. He wiped at his face with his sleeve, trying to clean up a bit. He squinted, searching for any way in, a crack, a servant's gate, anything to grab a crumb. He was afraid, sure. Afraid of a fight, of someone calling the cops. But for that second in the rain, fear was easier to forget than hunger. He crept along the side, nearly on his belly, sneakers sinking into the mud. In his heart, hope. It wasn't just for him now. It never really was. It was always for his sister. He found a glass door, slightly ajar. He was sure the smell was strongest there. Voices floated from far away, laughter. For a moment, he wished he could have that life, even for one night. He rested his hand on his belly again, checked that the backpack was still tied on his shoulder. A deep breath. He gently pushed the door open, making as little noise as possible. He slipped in quietly, curling up under a table. At least there, it didn't rain. He took in everything. Huge rug, leather couch, gleaming armchair. In the corner, a Christmas tree decked out in dimmed fairy lights. That hurt more than the cold. That house was everything his used to be, before his mother left, before the sickness. A house that smelled good, warm, full of light. Arthur bit his lip. His pride ached, fear ached, aches he couldn't quite name. His hand went for his backpack, hugging it tight. In the silence, all he could hear was his pounding heart and muffled laughter behind the door. It didn't matter. The boy was there, ready for anything. All he needed was a chance to grab some bread, anything at all, just that, tonight. Just one scrap of dignity to bring back to his sister and say, "Look, I did it," even if it all went wrong. When Arthur reached the mansion's hall, the warmth of the lights nearly blinded him after so long seeing only rain and shadows. Everything was so sparkling clean, so huge, he didn't know where to look. His soaked feet squelched on the rug. He could feel the gulf between him and all of this. The smell of the room itself so different from the street, real fresh bread, the scent of a clean home. But before he could go near anything, he heard hard footsteps in the hallway. He felt his heart stop. In a second, the man appeared. Well-groomed hair, clean-shaven, dark suit, a watch gleaming even in the low lamplight. Gustavo, the owner. He stopped at the far end of the room, gave Arthur a look as if he'd found a filthy dog in his dining room. Arthur froze, not sure if he should run or just squeeze his eyes shut and pretend he was invisible. His throat tightened, but he tried to speak. "I'm sorry, sir. He couldn't finish. His voice came out thin, trembling, almost crying. Gustavo didn't wait. He stepped forward and started yelling. "What are you doing here? How dare you come into my house? Another one of those brats with no manners. Think you can break into anywhere, do you?" Arthur felt his whole body shrink. His back felt heavy, as if someone were pressing him down just with their stare. "I just wanted." Arthur could barely hear himself. The words stuck, caught in his throat. He clung to the backpack strap, his last shred of safety. He tried but failed to choke down a sob, because crying would only make it worse. Gustavo jabbed his finger toward the door, hand trembling with fury. "Get out, now. Don't make me call security. I never want to see you here again." The roar of the rain outside grew louder for a moment, as if even the weather agreed with the shouting. For a second, that plus their harsh breathing was all there was. Arthur opened his mouth and shut it again, unable to explain himself. It showed all over his face. Eyes wide, chin trembling, mouth pulled in a line. A trickle of tears wiped away quickly with the back of his hand. The boy tried to act strong, but it was only weakness he felt. Cold, fear, hunger, and now, humiliation. He couldn't hide it. Gustavo stared at him with contempt, body rigid, afraid to dirty his own floor. But for a split second, his expression shifted. Just a little. As if a memory passed through, an uncomfortable reminder, but it fled as fast as it had come. Arthur felt alone again, just like on the streets at night. Only now it was inside a warm, lit place, where the walls themselves seemed to push him out without a word. He knew he wasn't welcome. He'd known before he even came, but now it was etched in stone. Clutching the backpack to his chest, he stepped backward, stumbling a bit on the slick carpet. His chest hurt. He wanted courage to ask just for bread, to explain why he was there, to talk about his sister, about missing his mom. But Gustavo didn't care to hear any of that. "Sorry. I'm sorry, sir," he whispered, nearly disappearing into himself. The man just rolled his eyes, face hard, flung the door open with a jerk, gesturing in a way that needed no words. "Just go." The silence thickened, broken only by thunder and the rain lashing the entryway. Arthur took a deep breath, scraped together what little strength he had, and shuffled out, legs wobbly. All the words stayed stuck inside, alongside the shout from someone who was tired of asking things from the wrong world. Stepping back outside, the rain hit him full on, freezing him all over again. He didn't look back. Fear was too strong, but the emptiness inside was stronger. And even without realizing, he carried off a whiff of that house's smell of promises that would never be for him. Inside, Gustavo stayed, staring at the muddy track on the rug. The silence was different now. His face still hard, but something turned over inside, some doubt maybe, a memory he didn't want to grow. He said nothing, wiped his hand on his jacket, went back down the hallway, but the sound of the boy's fleeing footsteps echoed through the big house for longer than he'd ever admit. Arthur stared at the floor, hands clenched, fingers numb with cold. It was obvious he was shaking, no matter how hard he tried to hide, every breath nearly a sob. The thick rug beneath his feet felt soft but couldn't hide his shame. Across from him, Gustavo stood still as stone, saying nothing but, "Get out." Not even a glance at the boy's face. That alone hurt enough. The boy glanced at the ceiling once more, as if searching for a last bit of courage. He clasped his hands to his chest, eyes shining, and said, in a voice nearly swallowed. "Sir, please. I just wanted a piece of bread. That's all." Gustavo didn't even blink. Didn't even pretend to consider it. Just turned away, face even harder. Made a sharp gesture with his hand, as if waving off a stray mutt. Worse than a scream. The rain beat on the window. Outside, the night was total, thick as ink. Just one streetlight left the water on the sidewalk shining gold. Silence filled the room for a few seconds, heavy as steel. Arthur swallowed hard. His voice escaped as no more than a whisper. "Sorry, sir. Really, I'm sorry." He saw no point in trying now. His face crumpled with tears, eyes brimming, the way only an 8-year-old can think an apology changes the world. Only this world didn't change. He turned awkwardly, looking always at the ground, as if he no longer deserved to see anything beautiful. The little porcelain dog in the corner, all gold, seemed to mock him. Arthur tripped on his soaked, too large shoes, nearly slipping off his feet, and ran out through the hall. On the way, the zipper of his old backpack opened slowly, though he didn't notice. It slid off his skinny shoulders, landing abandoned on the bottom step, half open, a faded scrap of blanket and a rolled-up paper tumbling out. But Arthur was too desperate to realize. Gustavo, standing still, held his breath. He said nothing, just watched the boy fall apart, vanish into the door that snapped shut with a flat thud. Gustavo's eyes hardened more, trying to defend himself from the guilt that was beginning to bubble up. But even while holding back his feelings, something hung in the air. The room went back to normal, filled with silence, but the smell of rain and cheap sweat still lingered, heavy and impossible to ignore. The food from the kitchen, fresh bread, roasting meat, only reminded everyone what Arthur had begged for and didn't get. There was plenty of bread, but the boy left hungrier than when he arrived. Arthur rounded the gate's corner in a hurry, his face soaked through with rain and tears. Each step was shaky, chest squeezed tighter, as if every last hope had been left behind with the backpack. He didn't care any more about being barefoot on one side, his shoes falling apart. All he wanted was to disappear. The street, once full of luxury, felt colder now, the wind slicing like a knife on his cheeks. Cars went by with low-beamed headlights, ignoring everything, and Arthur walked through streaks of light with no direction. He rubbed his thin hands over his eyes, trying to fight the tears, but he only cried harder. And nobody saw. Nobody cared. Back inside, Gustavo sat at his desk, trying to drown himself in paperwork, contracts, numbers. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the boy again, trembling, hands clasped, begging for bread. No matter how he tried to ignore it, Gustavo couldn't tune out the sound of the slamming door, or the soft thud of the backpack left behind. He told himself to forget it. Just a kid, he said, just an intruder. But even those words were losing their conviction. He raked his hand through his hair, impatient, took a deep breath, and kept trying to convince himself he'd done the right thing. In the middle of the street, Arthur stopped running the moment he realized he didn't have his backpack. He glanced back, scared, out of breath. He knew how dangerous it was to lose everything he had, because in there, along with a scrap of stale bread, were his life's most important memories. But the fear of Gustavo's shout, the mansion lit up like a jewelry store, was heavier than any ache of longing. He stood still, his brow furrowed, paralyzed by the dilemma. He took a step forward, wondering if he had the guts to go back. But then that memory came, the hard glare, the get out of here, that felt like a knife to his gut. His chest tightened, and all he wanted was to disappear into the darkness. He decided to keep walking, embracing the cold, ignoring the empty void opening wider in his chest. Raindrops pounded his thin jacket. Each one seemed to make his little heart colder and colder. His empty stomach rumbled so loud it could be heard. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst was being unseen, saying sorry and it not making the slightest difference. Carrying around shame, hunger, exhaustion, and now, not even his mother's old backpack. And Gustavo, even pretending not to care, felt something unsettled deep inside. An unease, an image that wouldn't fade from his mind. Arthur's crying echoed in his ears whenever the house fell quiet again. But Gustavo still had no idea what to do about it. He just knew that, somewhere in the depths, something inside him had shifted. The night dragged on, heavy with all the things no one dares to say: sorrow, shame, fear, and a bit of lost hope. Arthur faded into the darkness, and the mansion, bright and beautiful as it was, never felt as empty as it did now. The slam of the door still vibrated in the glass. You could hear wet footsteps moving away down the entrance hall, and after that, just one thing: nothing. No sound, no voice, just the huge mansion, far too empty despite all its luxury. The kind of silence that suffocates, like a wet, heavy blanket thrown over your chest. Gustavo stood there, still gripping the doorknob. The boy's face wouldn't leave his mind, that scared, sort of lost look. Red eyes from crying, his mouth trembling as he tried to apologize. It wasn't even anger that stayed inside Gustavo, just a strange discomfort, like something fundamental had gone wrong. He tried to shake it off, almost as if you could get rid of a memory by flicking your head. The living room was still all lit up, but it felt cold. Outside, the rain drummed harder. The windows rattled in the wind. Raindrops streaked the glass like scratches. The world out there seemed sad. Inside, Gustavo couldn't find peace in any corner. He started pacing, fiddling with his shirt cuff even though it was already perfect. Then he started messing with the buttons, undoing and redoing just to burn time. Tried distracting himself by staring at the expensive painting on the wall, reading stupid things on his phone. Nothing worked. Everything felt out of place, and Gustavo didn't know why. Even the mansion felt different, bigger somehow, colder, more hollow than before. Now and then he caught the sound of a distant car horn, or an engine roaring down the wet street. And there it was, the same strong discomfort, a stubborn, nagging thought, a crying boy, curled up, begging for food. He couldn't help remembering Arthur's thin face, the way he squeezed his hands together, as if pleading for one last scrap of hope. Gustavo tried to convince himself. You did the right thing, Gustavo. Not your problem. No reason to feel guilty. But somehow, those words rang empty, silly, almost a lie, even to his own ears. Something really wasn't right. He remembered the boy's eyes. They weren't the eyes of a thief. They were the eyes of someone alone, exhausted, maybe even sick. Eyes of a kid who's faced more fear than any little child should ever have to. That made his throat ache, more than he cared to admit. Walking past the mirrors in the hall, he glanced at himself. It was still him, Gustavo as always, perfectly put together, everything in order. But his reflection brought a strange thought. What's the point of all this, if you can't sleep in peace? The house's silence grew, until it felt like even the rain was screaming outside. Gustavo sank into the oversized couch, not interested in TV, not hungry, nothing. He sat still for a while, listening to the tick-tock of his expensive clock. Time passed, but the discomfort only grew, not shrank. Arthur's face wouldn't let up, coming back every 5 minutes. Every time he closed his eyes, it was as if Arthur had left an echo inside him. Suddenly, Gustavo wondered if maybe he hadn't done the right thing after all. But pride was too thick, like layers of old paint, smothering that thought. The memory of Arthur, wet shoes, clothes stuck to his body, shivering in the cold, it all kept coming back, relentless. He remembered the boy's tears and, more than anything, that mix of shame and hope in his eyes. And Gustavo, from the height of all that wealth, hadn't even given him a piece of stale bread. He kept replaying how he threw Arthur out, his voice harsh, nearly brutal. That echoed in the hallway, way louder than the clock. Gustavo's body grew agitated again. He fluffed the cushions, raked a hand through his hair, stood up, sat down, went into the kitchen just to open the fridge and take nothing. His stomach was empty, even with everything there was inside the house. It was a different kind of emptiness, not hunger, something harder to explain. More like a hole, you know? The kind you feel without knowing where it comes from. He went to the window, looked out, hoping the boy might still be out there. Couldn't see a thing, just the distant blur of lights through rain on glass. The downpour didn't let up, only got heavier, even darker. Then Gustavo realized, in the silence of that house, he could hear just how much was truly missing inside. The loudest noise was the one that wasn't there. No laughter, no kids' footsteps, no sound of life at all. Just the rain. And the heavy memory of the boy, of his plea for help unanswered. The hall clock struck the hour, but Gustavo had lost track of time. Everything seemed frozen at the instant he threw Arthur out. That silence, to him, was almost deafening. By accident, he noticed a little wet shoe left near the door. It belonged to no one there. His heart tripped. A deeper guilt hit, a regret that stuck inside. He should have at least asked the boy's name. He couldn't even manage that. He just shouted, just threw him out. Didn't even look at what the child was carrying. Remembered seeing a dropped backpack. Hadn't paid attention at the time, just wanted it all gone. Gustavo's chest tightened. Everything he'd always believed about himself, about what was right, felt tiny now. The silence shifted, from emptiness to nearly unbearable. The weight of a bad choice, one you can only truly feel when there's nobody left to see. Deep down, he knew, he wouldn't sleep that night. And outside, the rain just kept pouring harder. The light in the office was dim, just that soft yellow glow from the desk lamp, turning everything else into shadow. It was past midnight already, but Gustavo was still up, sitting in front of the computer. Everyone else in the house had gone to bed. Even the garden dogs were quiet. Now and then all you could hear was rain pattering on the leaves, and closer, his own uneasy breaths as he dragged the mouse slowly. He clicked the main camera's file, the one pointed straight at the front hall. All he had to do was press play, but suddenly his finger felt heavy. Something was off tonight with himself. Gustavo felt a hot discomfort, a knot stuck in his chest. He hadn't managed to finish his dinner, or the news, or even talk to his daughter. He couldn't stop thinking about that boy. The face. The way he looked down, skinny arms, the voice that barely came out when he apologized. The recording started. Gustavo froze, eyes wide. The hall stood empty at first. Suddenly, the door shivered, and in ran a blur, a little figure, soaked from head to toe. The boy. He stopped, silent as a shadow, as if trying to melt into the wall, just his eyes darting for a way out, but there was none in sight. His shoulders were hunched, like he was bracing against the whole world. Gustavo couldn't blink. Not once did Arthur look threatening. On the screen, the boy trembled a little, pulled some squashed bread from his pocket, and gripped it tight, glancing around to see if anyone came. But sure enough, Gustavo soon entered the frame. Tall, angry, an intimidating presence. There he was, pointing, lips tight, his voice sounded too rough for little Arthur. The boy flinched back, nearly tripped. Gustavo clenched his fist on the desk. He remembered how harsh he'd sounded, as if Arthur wasn't even a child, just a problem to get rid of. Watching back from the camera, it seemed over the top. He felt embarrassed. Arthur didn't argue, had no strength to explain. He blinked, breathed deep, then started crying quietly, almost soundless. When he bent down to pick up the bread, the tears fell, mixing with rainwater on the floor. He shook his head, whispered something. "Sorry, sir," and ran out. Only now, watching the camera, you could see, when he rushed out, his backpack slipped from his shoulder, landed by the door. That old, ragged backpack, lopsided, slumped into a corner. Such a small detail, but Gustavo shivered like someone had poured a bottle of cold water down his back. On screen, the image froze, the boy long gone. Only the backpack left, toppled over, lying open in the dark. For a moment, Gustavo thought about pretending he hadn't noticed. Didn't want to know, didn't want to feel any more guilt. But his eyes stayed glued to the video, glued to that abandoned backpack. But it wasn't just a backpack. You could see, from the way the boy carried it, that it was the most precious thing he owned. A keepsake? A scrap of hope? He sat there a while. Pretended he'd go to bed, but couldn't. His hands started to sweat. He grabbed his jacket and crept downstairs, each step echoing through the empty house. The entry hall sat in darkness, a single lamp burning in the distance. The air smelled like wet carpet, with a trace of rain sneaking under the door. Gustavo saw the backpack, now real, right in front of him. Small, muddy, with a nearly fallen keychain clinging to the zipper. He wondered, how could something so tattered mean the world to someone like that? He crouched beside it, almost trembling. His hand ran gently over the worn fabric, trying to imagine what secrets it held, what stories had found shelter in all that mess. In his mind, noise thundered, waves crashing. He thought of his own daughter growing up in that sprawling house with everything right, thought of the boy, barely shod, who still held tight to that old backpack like it was gold. Gustavo lingered, gripping the strap, but unable to open it. His heart pounded, confused. He wondered if he should be meddling with something so private. What if it was just sour bread, some ragged clothes? Or, what if there was something bigger, an answer to that look of sadness? He hovered there, torn, but couldn't resist. Arthur's face haunted him. Always looking down, small inside his soaked coat, mumbling apologies no one wanted to hear. The rain outside intensified, rattling against the glass. The noise snapped Gustavo out of his trance, no longer able to make excuses. He stood up, holding the backpack tight, and climbed back to his office. Sat down, staring at it like it was Pandora's box. He didn't open it, not yet, just sat and stared, already sensing that inside lay a truth heavier than stone. Guilt flooded him. For shouting. For not asking. For failing to see anything beyond his own pride. Silence swallowed the house again. Just the hall's clock ticking, and his own jagged breathing. Right there, in the middle of all that loneliness, Gustavo felt something shift. Maybe fear. Or just that old ache he always pretended he didn't have. He stayed right there, waiting for the right moment to discover what the boy had cherished so much, never imagining that little piece of the past would turn his whole world upside down. Gustavo lingered a while in the dark hall, just listening to the muffled ticking of the big living room clock and, further away, the faint patter of rain hitting the glass. He gazed at the knapsack dumped by the door, faded brown, stitched up every which way. There were dark mud spots, a tooth missing from the zipper, clumsy patches everywhere. Just another beat-up bag any poor child might carry, but now it was different. Suddenly, it sat heavy on the floor, as if it hid a massive secret. He picked it up awkwardly, almost apologizing just for touching it. Hands that had always been steady with contracts and decisions now shook like paper. He ran a finger over the thin, patchy fabric and noticed a crooked, hand-sewn seam. He imagined the person who'd threaded it, maybe the boy's mother, mending what she could to keep anything from lacking. That thought made him even more anxious. For Gustavo, opening that backpack was harder than signing any important document. He pulled the zipper gently, careful not to rip the fabric or damage the few things the boy had left. Rain scent mingling with the faint smell of old bread drifted out, along with something else, an old, light perfume. At the bottom lay a few breadcrumbs, a ragged blue cloth, and then the surprise, a photo tucked between two thin notebooks. He picked up the photo with care, not sure he wanted to look. The yellow light of the hall flickered over the glossy paper, begging to reveal a buried past. There was a baby smiling scrawny, cheeks wrapped in tape, cradled in the arms of a woman in a white uniform with blue trim. The uniform was the exact kind the maids wore, years ago, right there in the mansion. And that face. Gustavo's heart beat faster. It was Camila. Her smile wide, tired but sweet, just as he remembered. The same steady gaze, that shine of someone who powered through, a look that cared for others as if they were her own. But something was different here. She wasn't just staff in this photo, she was holding her son, her own child. It took a second, but the truth dropped on his chest like a boulder. He remembered that night exactly, years ago. Screaming, smoke in the air, red and black on the walls, his own daughter coughing as fire climbed to the ceiling. And it was Camila who ran in, without thinking, grabbed the girl in her arms and raced out of the blazing house. After that, she worked a few more days in silence, then vanished. Nobody ever knew where she went, never took anything but a bag, probably a twin of this one. Gustavo never asked, never truly cared about her fate. He needed to sit. He slumped against the wall, dazed. His hand brushed something hard and cold inside the backpack. A name badge, battered, with a crooked ribbon. He read it slowly. Camila Souza, housekeeper, Albuquerque mansion. The badge had her picture, even younger, same uniform, her name printed beneath. There was no doubt. Arthur was Camila's son. The fragile boy, with sad eyes, the one he'd chased out mercilessly, was the child of the woman who'd once risked everything to save his little girl. A lump formed in his throat. Gustavo stared at the things in his lap. Thinking straight was nearly impossible. It was as if the scene of throwing Arthur out was replaying in slow motion, only now it hurt like a knife. He saw Arthur's eyes, so scared and wet with tears. Remembered the soft, almost whispered voice, apologizing, saying he was just hungry, it was just for his sister. He hadn't believed it, thought it was just another street kid's con. Now he felt small. Small and ashamed. The huge hall was engulfed in silence. Outside, the rain pounded harder, promising longer cold and an even longer night. Inside, Gustavo realized he'd never really known anything about those who worked for him. Didn't know if any of them had families, dreams, fears. Only now, with his fingers gripping Camila's photograph and her faded badge, could he see the size of the void his indifference had made. He swallowed hard, eyes brimming. This couldn't just be coincidence, he thought. Maybe God was trying to show him something, a chance at redemption. Hard to believe he'd yelled at that boy, chased him away, treated someone who, without him knowing, was the child of the woman who'd once saved his most precious treasure like garbage. He staggered to his feet, dizzy. The weight of remorse pressed heavily on his shoulders. He knew nothing would ever be the same again. He had to find Arthur. He couldn't let that boy wander in the cold, with a sick sister, no mother, just because Gustavo himself had been blinded by his own pride. He walked slowly toward the living room, hugging the backpack to his chest, as if trying to erase all the wrong he'd just done. Climbing the stairs, tears welled up without asking permission. Camila's smiling face stayed stuck in his mind, burning like those fires from years ago, showing him that maybe, just maybe, he could save a life now, at least once, if he found the courage to face what terrified him most, his own conscience. Gustavo stood there, clutching the photo as if he might turn back time just by the strength in his hands. He lost track of the minutes passing. The house, always so full of orders and loud voices, was now filled with a silence that pressed down. He felt the cold leather of the sofa beneath him, but inside, the warmth rising had nothing good about it: shame, guilt, the sense of being exposed before everything he'd always ignored. That photo. He looked again at Camila's face. The wrinkled uniform, the shy smile. He remembered her rushing through the rooms, those light steps, as if she never wanted to disturb or bother anyone. Remembered how she'd leave a bowl of soup out when his daughter was sick. Then the bitterness rose in his mouth. How many times had he looked at Camila as if she was no one special? Just another invisible person, there to serve him. He closed his eyes and the image of that day surged back. Smoke, the stench of burning. The scream from upstairs. Camila running, and even as everyone yelled at her to stay out. It was Camila who'd cradled his daughter, carried her out in arms, covered in soot, face streaked with tears. It was her. Without a thought for herself, just for the girl. She saved them both. After that, she was simply gone. Nobody had ever explained. For years, Gustavo just kept moving. Not his problem. Life moves on, he'd say to himself. Now, with her photo between his fingers, he faced the weight of every excuse he'd made to never go after her, never ask, never find out how Camila was. He just paid her last month's wages, left it at security, and didn't think twice. After all, there was always something more important: meeting, money, travel. Poor woman disappearing? She probably found something better. He felt ashamed. Really ashamed. As if every bit of pride he ever had in what he'd achieved was just dust, blown away by the wind. The guilt was deep. It swallowed him whole. Not just for what he'd failed to do for Camila, but for who knows how many other people around him, suffering hunger, pain, need, and he, locked behind tall gates, watching through glass and calling them troublemakers. The rain thudded hard on the window. Before, that sound was just one more background noise in a perfect house. Now, it was a soundtrack to his own rotten soul. He thought of the boy crying in the hall, that pale face, skinny, shivering, clutching his backpack to his chest like armor. There was so much fear in that look, but also courage. Courage to walk in where you know you're not wanted, because hunger hurt worse than fear. Gustavo shoved his hand in his jacket pocket, felt his wedding ring, cold, and realized he couldn't even give his own family what really mattered. It had always been about getting bigger, winning, keeping safe. Today, he felt more like a scared child than a successful man. He looked at the photo again. The baby was Arthur. You could tell by the spiky hair. Camila's arm wrapped around him, and Gustavo saw something he'd never really noticed before: real love. Not the kind you buy, not the security money brings. The kind that makes someone rush into flames. And him? He'd locked himself away, called the fire brigade, never cared to know the whole story of those sharing his roof. A cold sweat broke on his forehead. His hands shook, but he couldn't let go of the photo. He tried to imagine what had become of those two, mother and son, after that day. Tried to picture how a child grows up motherless, on the streets, still caring for a sick little sister. Felt the weight seep right to the bone. It wasn't a physical pain, something worse. The kind of pain no medicine hides, no lie can cover. His eyes filled up, and he tried to swallow the tears, but he couldn't. They ran hot down the face of a man who thought he was cold. In the silence, he heard only his own ragged breathing. The clock ticked, but it sounded like mockery. Time's passed, Gustavo. Time's passed, and you did nothing. Sleeping safe in your riches while someone who rescued you disappeared without even a phone call. Suddenly, nothing there meant anything. The imported rug, the crystal goblet he'd nearly knocked over, the pristine smell of the house, none of it made up for knowing someone had gone hungry with a last name he should have protected, that a boy had entered his home desperate and left worse. Thrown out like an animal, humiliated. He stared at the badge cover. Camila. Read her name over and over, vowing never to forget. Silent, with his voice breaking deep in his chest, he promised himself that as long as it depended on him, he'd never let someone be invisible again, never be this much of a coward again. His fingers curled around the photo. Forgive me, he whispered, nearly out of breath. I left you behind. The rain kept falling, washing the glass, lashing like regret that wouldn't quit. The world outside had no idea, but in that huge, rich room, one man let his pride fall apart for the first time in his life. And even alone, or maybe because he was alone, he felt something new, a will to change, no matter the cost. A longing to find Arthur, set things right, be someone different. Everything Gustavo had thought about who he was no longer counted. All that mattered now was doing what had to be done. And that started the hardest way of all, by facing your own shame without turning away. They say everyone is equal in the rain. That night, Gustavo felt that saying in his bones. At first, he didn't know exactly where to start, just knew he couldn't stand still any longer. He hurried to the car, didn't even think about an umbrella, stumbling over his own thoughts and still trembling with guilt, Camila's photo and badge clutched in his hand like a compass. But he quickly realized you couldn't look for Arthur by sitting behind the wheel. No kid sleeps inside a luxury car. Nobody who goes hungry hides in a fancy neighborhood. He pulled over right there, on a corner he barely remembered, got out without a glance back, splashed through puddles. With every step, the cold crept up his pant legs, right to the bone. The sounds of the water mixed with the traffic. Everything seemed gray. The air smelled of garbage, cigarettes, old grease, another world, and now he finally felt it for real. He stopped at a bar washed in yellow light, the kind that makes everything seem more worn out. Inside, it was full of hard laughter, cachaca fumes, and wobbly tables. Behind the counter, a young man with narrow eyes looked Gustavo up and down. Gustavo felt himself shrink, soaked in a business suit. He looked like anything but a regular. "Excuse me, sir, have you seen a boy around here? 8 or so, skinny, dark hair?" He had a backpack, totally torn up. The bartender let out a low chuckle, glancing at the others, wary. An old goalie in the corner wide-eyed, instantly realizing there was money on the line. "Lost rich man, that's something new, huh? Did your son run away?" a drunk shouted, clapping his hands. Gustavo felt his face flush but chose not to answer back. His pride burned, but it was different now, not armor, just true shame. "He's not my son. Just a boy. I'm trying to find him." For a second, the silence was heavy. Only the clink of glasses on the table filled the gap. Gustavo noticed his own voice sounded weak, almost an apology just for existing there. One of the older men glanced at him, a look of bitter pity, one of those who's seen too much loneliness. "Listen, son, there's so many kids living on the streets. But if it's the one I saw, he ran by here a little while ago, shaking like a leaf in the wind. Wouldn't look at anyone. Turned off to the side street, near the viaduct." Gustavo thanked him, a lump in his throat, hurrying off with the cold metal of his watch clamped to his wrist, his wet shirt sticking to his chest. The street was filthy, littered with trampled food scraps, soggy papers clinging to his shoes. Darkness had conquered even the will of anyone to care for these corners. Step by step he passed hidden faces inside boxes, eyes peeking from beneath blankets. Children, adults, everyone mixed together, age almost impossible to guess. The rain fell harder, each drop feeling heavier, pounding down on the shoulders of those with nowhere to run. Time lost meaning. Gustavo couldn't tell if 10 minutes or an hour had passed. He only knew his feet hurt, a pain that felt like punishment. He looked at his reflection in the window of a shut diner. Pale face, hollow eyes, hair plastered to his forehead. For the first time, he felt just like anyone he'd always pretended not to see. He wasn't the old Gustavo with his pressed suit anymore. He was just someone desperate not to make another mistake. He ducked into a doorway where 3 homeless men were warming their hands over a cup of weak coffee. He stopped, breathing in the bitter scent of warped hope. "Excuse me. Sorry to bother you. Have you seen a little boy? Alone, old backpack." He was crying. The men looked him over, doubtful. One, his face scarred by a hard life, replied, "Mister, lost kids round here are nothing new. But the little one? Yeah, maybe." He was crying, coughing something awful, disappeared down that alley back there. "It's freezing out, man." He thanked them again. He wanted to run, but his knees wouldn't cooperate, the cold stinging his chest. Every so often, he squeezed Camila's photo in his pocket, feeling a strange force, as if they were watching him from that crumpled picture. Every stone in the pavement seemed out to trip him. Every car horn yanked him back to reality. He heard more laughter, teenagers this time mocking the rich guy who lost his money. He didn't care. He'd ask, beg, humiliate himself as many times as it took. He asked, showed the photo of the lost backpack, got mocking looks, jokes, even a shove or two on the sidewalk. He put up with all of it, because guilt gripped his chest like thorns. Sometimes he'd stop on the curb, close his eyes, and let the rain wash straight down his face. Arthur's image, crying, looking up at him as if begging the world, not leaving his mind. Why had he yelled? Why hadn't he checked the backpack, heard the panic? It was all so heavy his legs trembled. He couldn't go back to the mansion, couldn't hide. Now he understood. There was no going back. In the distance, he spotted a line of people waiting for free meals. He asked again, repeated the description. The volunteer girls hadn't seen a boy like that, but one mentioned someone mumbling between bites that they'd seen a kid, clutching another younger child, heading into a nearby dark alley. Gustavo nearly broke into a run, body begging him to stop, but he didn't even think. The smell was stronger, the ground slipperier. Time circled in on itself. Inside him, there was only fear. Fear that maybe what was left of Camila would die too. Fear he could never fix it. And as he stumbled and hurried on, Gustavo finally understood what it truly meant to be lost. It wasn't about forgetting the way home. It was not knowing if a single cruel moment had killed all the good things left inside. It was realizing that all the money in the world couldn't warm the cold felt by those, deep down, who know they've failed. At the end of that street, he wiped his face, sweat and rain running together. He stopped. For a moment, all the world's noise seemed to vanish. And there, with his chest aching, he decided he would not leave without finding Arthur, even if it meant crossing every inch of night, mud, and broken pride. Because now it wasn't just about a lost little boy, it was about forgiveness and the desperate hope for a second chance. The sky hung low and heavy, almost black, the rain refusing to leave, as if it still had sorrow left to wash away. The fancy neighborhood streets had never seen so much mud, so much trash swept to the gutters. And there was Gustavo, unsure if it was sweat, rain, or just the wetness of searching so long for a boy he hardly knew, but now, somehow, meant everything. It was late. Most people safe inside, windows shut, lights out. Only the far-off beeping of those still fleeing the storm. Among all that emptiness, the only sound left was water trickling from gutters and Gustavo's pounding heart, beating too hard, almost hurting. He turned another corner, exhausted, tripping over every uneven step. That's when he saw, at the far end of an alley, nearly hidden between garbage bags and torn boxes, a small shape. If not for that last bit of light from the busted streetlight, he would have missed it. But there they were, Arthur, and next to him, an even smaller little girl. The sight, God, it's unforgettable. Arthur sitting on the filthy ground, pressed against the soaked wall, holding his sister in a grip stronger than most grown men. His eyes wide, expecting that anyone in this world would only come to hurt, to take away the little they had left. Hair-drenched, face streaked with dirt and tears. His hand shook, but he held the girl, wiping her sweaty forehead with the ragged sleeve of his shirt. Gustavo froze for a second. His chest tightened, the kind of pain no one wants to admit because it looks like weakness. But there was no more running. He stepped closer, scared even his own footsteps might frighten the boy. Arthur saw him coming. His eyes, my God, were full of nothing but fear. He stepped in front of his sister, like that scrawny body could somehow be a shield against everything bad. He didn't say a word, just stared, breath short and trembling. The smell there was awful, an assault of old trash and stagnant rain. Gustavo almost gagged, but didn't dwell on it. All he could do was look at the boy, the girl, so weak she barely seemed to breathe, face deathly pale, lips tinged bluish. Her eyes didn't even open. She lay limp, only her fingers now, and then squeezing her brother's arm. And something in Gustavo broke. Not the tough businessman's pride, not anger or ego, just pain. A pain that rose up uninvited, burning his eyes, cheeks, until it became real tears. Not one or two. Gustavo dropped to his knees, down in the mud, the freezing water soaking through, icy sting on his skin. The world faded away, leaving only this alley, this raw suffering. He tried to speak, voice trembling. It took a while to get even one breath. "Forgive me, Arthur." The words came out hoarse, like they weren't really his. Arthur didn't understand. He stayed put, fierce, shielding his sister, eyes blurry with tears but still wary. Too tired to run, too beaten down to trust. He wanted to believe but had seen too many broken promises. Gustavo inched closer, no sudden moves. He set his hands on the ground first, showing he meant no harm. He met the boy's gaze, even though he didn't know if he could bear to see so much pain up close. I know who you are, son. I found your backpack, saw your mom's photo, her badge. I should have remembered. I should have done things differently. Please, forgive me." Rain was pouring again, pounding the leather of his shoes, dripping from hair to face. Nobody moved. All Gustavo could see was Arthur's chest rising and falling in anxious little gulps. The boy looked at him, hope and suspicion warring in his expression. The little girl, barely able to lift her head, let out a whimper. Not a cry for help, just weakness, plain and simple. Arthur pulled her closer. In his panic, he didn't notice when Gustavo finally managed a steady voice, even though it was thick with sobs. "You're not staying here anymore. I swear. You'll never go hungry again, never sleep in the cold again. Let me help. Let me take care of you. Even if you hate me, even if you never forgive me, just let me try." Arthur took a long breath, looking around, eyes darting everywhere. One last, tiny spark of hope flickered in him. Slowly, he relaxed, though he still clung to his sister. But he didn't flinch anymore. And for the first time, he let someone come near. Gustavo leaned forward, catching the scent of lost childhood in the grime. He stretched out a trembling hand, gently touched the boy's shoulder. No more boss, no more businessman, no mansion, just a broken man and two children on the run from disaster. For a moment, time stopped. The rain softened, as if the sky was waiting for permission to stop crying. Silence prevailed, broken only by Gustavo's soft sobbing, guilt and promise tangled together. And there, in the damp filth of that ugly alley, three lives found each other in the simplest way, no explanation, just the courage to beg forgiveness and, even greater, the courage to accept it. Gustavo gathered Arthur and his sister with a care he'd never even had for his most valuable possessions. Rain still fell lightly, the pavement reflecting the glow of the streetlights, but it was warm inside the car. The back seat became an improvised nest, the two kids curled up, still shaking, Arthur shielding his sister with his arm, as if he could hold all the fear at bay. Gustavo drove, trembling too, but not from cold. He checked the mirror, seeing the children's eyes glued to the window, struggling to decide if it was another bad dream or if, at last, they were safe. Arthur sniffled, squeezing his sister's shoulder every time the car jolted. No one said a word. Even the radio seemed embarrassed to disturb the silence. When they reached the gate, Gustavo breathed deep. The security guards looked on, unsure if it was really the boss, given the state he was in, bringing two children home. Gustavo scrambled out, opened the back door, and before anything else, gently stroked the little girl's head. She was already drifting off, exhaustion and fever. Arthur didn't even know if he should thank him. He only pulled his sister closer, afraid she might disappear. Inside, high ceilings, spotless rugs, the scent of fabric softener. A huge house that had always felt too cold. At least for a second, Gustavo hoped that could change. Soon the cook arrived, startled too, uncertain whether to question, help, or just watch. Arthur paused at the entrance, afraid to step on the fancy rug and wake up the whole place. The little girl stared at the lights, eyes wide, taking deep breaths of the kind of real food smell, oven-baked, not from the trash. Her stomach growled. No one said anything, but everyone heard. Gustavo struggled to keep his composure. For the first time, he wasn't upset about a broken routine, a soaked car, or filthy clothes on the floor. He just wanted, desperately, for the two to feel safe, to know that here, no one would hurt them. He kneeled again, this time on the carpet, face to face with Arthur. The boy's face was swollen from crying, his little hands stained by cold and dirt. Before he could say anything, Gustavo met his eyes, and the only thing he could think to do was gently wipe away one stubborn tear trailing down Arthur's cheek. "It's all right now, son. It's over," he whispered, voice raw. Arthur just blinked, still unsure. He wanted to trust, but his heart raced as before. His sister, quiet as ever, rested her head on Gustavo's leg, nearly fainting. He picked her up, carefully as if handling old crystal, and carried her to the couch. Arthur followed halfway, waiting for permission, like he was about to invade a castle. "Come on, Arthur, it's all right. No one here will ever send you away. I promise." The cook brought fresh bread, sweet coffee, hot soup. Steam rose, filling every corner with a homey aroma. Arthur looked at the tray like he couldn't believe it. Their first spoonfuls were timid. The girl ate slowly, Arthur making sure she got her share before taking his own. Gustavo sat beside them, unable to look away. He realized he'd never heard the sound of truly hungry children eating. It was a different kind of noise, a mix of fear of losing it, hope of going on. All of it gripped his throat. Deep down, Gustavo blamed himself for everything, even for taking so long to realize what really mattered. Eating between spoonfuls, Arthur looked at Gustavo, almost puzzled. The man's gaze was no longer cold or rushed. It was the gaze of someone who finally saw beyond his own world. He took a napkin and, unasked, wiped soup from the little girl's chin. She gave the tiniest sideways smile, enough to melt Gustavo's heart for good. "You're staying here now. I'll take care of you. I swear, it's a promise." His voice broke, but no one noticed. Both kids' eyes were already shining brighter. The room filled with the scent of soup, warmth, and that gentle, unstartled silence. The girl fell asleep right there, head in Arthur's lap. He stroked her hair, finally letting his shoulders relax. Bit by bit, his guard came down, a sigh, his body settling into the couch, for the first time in ages seeming not to be running from something. Gustavo watched them. His own long-frozen heart couldn't handle the feeling. He stood up, headed to the door, but before leaving, turned back to check it was all real. There were the siblings, small, fragile, but now safe. At that moment, he realized the huge, hollow mansion needed them more than they needed it. Never again would he ignore the pain in a frightened stare. Never again. He stood there a while, listening to the peaceful breathing of the children, the tick of the clock, the soft patter of rain dying away outside. He knew from that night on, everything would be different. Even the house smelled different now. And for the first time, Gustavo smiled. The kind of smile you can't quite explain, but that shows hope really can seep into even the coldest places and change everything. The next morning, the smell of fresh bread had already filled the hallway before the sun was properly up. Arthur woke slowly, lying in a soft bed, staring at the high ceiling, still not believing it wasn't just a good dream. He turned quietly and saw his sister sleeping peacefully, finally breathing deep, no more coughing. She was pink-cheeked, wrapped in layers of blankets and affection. He smiled, pressed his forehead to hers, softly, not to wake her, just to hold on to that peace a little longer. In another room, Gustavo was already awake, but now no one would call him cold. His face had lost that icy look. He had dark circles. Most of the night, he'd paced, peeking in on the kids, checking their breathing, fetching water for them, stuff you do when you're learning to care again. Their first morning together was full of strange silences, but they weren't heavy. The gentle clink of teacups, an apple sliced with care, the cook bringing hot milk, smiling more than usual. Arthur murmured thanks, almost a whisper. The woman smiled back, adding an extra cake to his plate, just to see if it could coax out a grin. After breakfast, the great mansion, used to the heavy footsteps of hurried adults, began to echo with lighter voices. There was even a bit of laughter, though shy. Arthur's sister woke up bright-eyed, asked to be carried, something she hadn't wanted in weeks, so weak as she'd been. When the tutor arrived, arms full of colorful books and drawings, Arthur froze. He fidgeted, staring at his hands, fearful of making mistakes, ashamed he couldn't read like others. "Can I stay here with you?" he whispered to his sister. Gustavo watched from the doorway, heart tightening. He crossed his arms, trying to hide the feeling, wondering how he'd never noticed details like this, not even with his own daughter. The lesson began on the living room rug, with the teacher showing letters, sounds. Arthur struggled, stumbled over some words, but nobody laughed. Gustavo edged closer, settled onto the sofa, pretending to read the paper, when in truth he never took his eyes off them. Each time Arthur got something right, he grinned, proud, not realizing Gustavo saw every bit. The little sister watched each syllable in awe. Only those who've been afraid of losing someone understand that look. Now and then, she'd clutch her battered backpack, gazing at her mother's photo as if drawing strength. Gustavo noticed, felt a different kind of weight. He recognized that old ID badge clutched in her fist. Nobody said a word, but everyone felt Camila's absence, each in their own way. At lunch, Gustavo insisted the two sit at the main dining table, huge, the one he had eaten at, alone, nearly every day. It all felt new, even for him. The silverware, the strange silence. Then the little girl asked if she could put jelly on her rice, which made Arthur giggle, one of those giggles that slips out before you can catch it. Gustavo didn't get it, but nodded. Here, everyone eats however they want. His gaze was kind, free of judgment. In the days that followed, everything changed. Gustavo worked half the day, but before leaving, always ruffled the kids' hair, awkward but sincere. When he came home, he set the paperwork aside, switched off the phone, sat with them on the couch. He listened as Arthur, shy and eyes down, told of nights on the streets, of his fears, freezing moments. Slowly, as he realized no one here was judging, just listening, he found the courage to speak. The little girl didn't talk much yet, but she drew pictures for Gustavo, who kept them all in a box, without telling anyone. Sometimes at night, he'd peek into their room, just to make sure they were wrapped up tight. One evening, he even heard Arthur whisper, "Thank you, Mom," to Camila's photo. That rattled him more than any business deal ever could. The house changed, too. The staff adored the kids' shy ways. One started teaching the girl how to make chocolate cake, dusting her with flour, smearing it on her cheeks, never in a hurry to clean up, knowing those messy minutes were precious. Arthur learned to ride a bike in the garden, took some spills, but got up every time. Gustavo, who'd never made time for things like this, steadied the handlebars, cheering him on harder than he did at the stock market. There were stormy days, but now the rain brought no fear. Only a reason to run to the window and watch the droplets race down the glass. The siblings huddled on the rug, watched cartoons, shared popcorn. Gustavo, watching from a distance, realized the house's silence was gone. Now he heard the scamper of little feet, laughter, soft crying, real life. Slowly, the emptiness that had haunted the mansion was replaced by conversation, the smell of chocolate, a peace even Gustavo hadn't known existed. He learned, piece by piece, how to meet someone's eyes, how to ask if they were okay, and actually wait for the answer, not just out of habit. One night before bed, Arthur crept into Gustavo's office, clutching his sister's hand. "Can we stay here forever?" he asked. The millionaire felt his throat close up, swallowed hard, looked into those nervous eyes, and answered, "You're my family now." Arthur smiled shy, but it overflowed. A tear traced Gustavo's cheek, and this time he didn't hide it. Nothing else had to be said. Some things are for the heart alone. From then on, everything changed. The cold walls became drawing boards. The emptiness gave way to the light sounds of people who cared. A new family took shape, crooked, full of scars, but true as could be. The sun had barely risen, but the mansion garden was already bathed in a gentle light, nothing like the cold brilliance that used to rule the place. You could hear the rustle of leaves heavy with dew, a new kind of quiet, a quiet that felt almost reverent, seeping into every corner. Gustavo hadn't slept much. Every night, his memories returned, blending Arthur's small face with Camila's tired smile from years before, the day she left this world but left an indelible mark behind. Today, he stood by a table near the azaleas, holding the faded photo he'd found in the backpack. The corners were bent, colors a little washed out, but there they were, little Arthur, hugging his mother tight, her smile the kind that stops time for a second. In the background, his little sister with those wide, hopeful eyes. Even in the picture, you could see it, a hope they shared, a gentleness all their own. Gustavo noticed his hand tremble slightly. It wasn't the cold. It was that kind of silent, heavy emotion that squeezes your chest. For a few seconds, he thought of all he'd done. All the days spent ignoring people like Camila, telling himself, everyone's got their place, their worth, as if the world was only made of high walls and locked gates. He bit his lip, forcing himself to really see it now. At the edge of the table, there was a new picture frame. He'd had it brought in last night, one with gold etchings that wasn't too fancy, because he knew if Camila were there, she'd laugh, crack a joke, say the simple things are what matter. He picked up the photo, running a finger gently over her face. A small stain on the corner pulled up a memory, the day they spilled juice, Camila laughing and chasing Arthur, the little house alive with childhood noise, longing, and good, beautiful chaos. He slipped the photo into the frame, straightened it until it lined up just right. The morning sunlight glinted off the glass, making Camila's smile come alive. Gustavo felt a huge weight slide off his shoulders, a kind of relief he'd never known before. In that moment, he understood what it meant to be present, to truly care. As he studied the photo, the world around him slowed. Deep in the house, Arthur was giggling at something on the piano, a rapid, small laugh, the kind only children have. Meanwhile, his now rosy-cheeked sister chatted happily with a caregiver about a new toy. Their voices drifted quietly out to the garden, mingling with the gentle breeze. Gustavo felt like crying, but held it back. He breathed deep, blinking slowly. This wasn't sadness, and it wasn't ordinary happiness. It felt like finding a lost piece of yourself, and at last, holding it tight. He pulled out a chair and sat so he was facing the photo. This time, no businessman's hurry, just the quiet respect of someone who now understood the weight of that story. Softly, as if Camila could hear, he whispered, "I'm sorry. And thank you. I'll never let anyone forget you. Or Arthur. Or the courage the two of you showed." He stayed like that for a while. The sun got warmer, scent of fresh earth filling the air. A certain peace came, a peace that none of life's prizes or achievements had ever given him. No trophy, no deal, no new car key could make his heart pound quite like this, both sweet and aching. Now, only one thing mattered: memory, promise, real people. In his mind, the images start falling into place. Camila, still a girl, saving her daughter from the fire. The shock, the tears, the gratitude. Back then he thought all that was normal, thought it could be paid for with money alone. Foolish, he thinks, almost laughing at the absurdity of it. Now he realizes, Real wealth is made of memories like these, of looking back with pride, knowing you truly honored those who deserved it. Right then and there, he decides that photo will always stay in plain sight. He'll tell that story to everyone who walks into that house, no matter who it is. He makes a promise to himself, never let the children forget how brave their mother was, how hard she fought, and how an 8-year-old boy, carrying nothing but a backpack and hope, managed to teach an old man what really matters. The garden seems to breathe alongside him. Gustavo stands up, picture frame in hand, and heads slowly back inside. In the hallway, he runs into Arthur, who eyes the new frame with curiosity. The boy's eyes light up, immediately recognizing his mother. He doesn't say a word, but gives a different kind of smile, deeply moved, the kind that proves he understands the weight of that gesture. Gustavo puts his hand on the boy's shoulder, silent. There's only that beautiful silence, where all that's important can be felt without being said. He knows, more than ever, he's at peace with his past, not because of what he lost, but because, at last, he's honoring, in the present, everything that truly matters. And now, with Camila's photo shining from its little corner, the children, and all the stories woven into their memories, he feels, for the first time, that the entire world fits, whole, in the palm of his hand. Arthur woke up with a start that morning, eyes wide, searching for a danger that didn't exist anymore. It took him a few seconds to remember which bed he was in. Under a warm, soft blanket, everything smelled different, not like the street, not like the shelter where he'd slept before with his sister. This was the smell of a clean place, the scent of home. He turned over, looking for his sister. She was sound asleep, grinning quietly at some dream, clutching the new doll she'd gotten the day before. Her face, once worn down by fever, now looked flushed, full of life. Arthur took a deep breath. Just a breath, but he felt as if a boulder he'd carried since his mother died got a little lighter. Outside the window, a chorus of birds was raising a ruckus, something he'd never heard before, not between the honking and shouting of the city. And for a moment, a strange feeling washed over him, happiness laced with fear, like wanting to laugh and cry all at once, because all this still felt almost make-believe. In the kitchen, Gustavo was already waiting. Shirt still formal, but this time the sleeves rolled up, looking far less put together. He was trying to make scrambled eggs, but was hopelessly lost. The housekeeper laughed quietly from her corner, and his mock scowl didn't fool anyone. When Arthur walked in, Gustavo greeted him with a kind of smile he'd never seen before, not from his own father, not from any teacher, not from the people who'd looked right past him on the streets. It was a smile full of genuine pride just to see him there. "Come eat, you too," Gustavo called, his voice gruff. Arthur felt a warmth in his chest. He hesitated for a moment, still wondering if he could really trust this man. But hunger won out, and so did the desire to simply sit down in peace. Arthur's sister raced to the table, her eyes shining, already forgetting what it was like to live on crumbs. Gustavo pulled out her chair for her as if it were second nature. At first, nobody really knew what to say. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, and all you could hear was spoons scratching against plates, the housekeeper in the background talking about some recipe. But little by little, they found things to talk about. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It became the pause before a good story. Arthur still feared it could all slip away, like the wind might steal it, or a silly mistake could ruin everything. But as time went by, he realized Gustavo was really there, every moment. In the small things, asking if they wanted more rice, remembering his sister's medicine, sliding over just to catch the two of them laughing at cartoons. Even the way Arthur saw him changed. Gustavo had once seemed gigantic, invincible, master of the world. Now he was just a regular man, with the dark circles of someone who hadn't slept well, waking up in the night afraid of losing people he loved. Little by little, everything outside the house changed too. Neighbors started asking about the new kids. Some turned up their noses. But many, seeing Gustavo walking the two kids to school holding their hands, began to realize something good had happened there. One day, Arthur came running home with a good grade on his math test. He held the paper up to Gustavo's face with all the courage he could muster. Gustavo just opened his arms, waiting for him, and hugged him for a long time. Nobody said a word, but everyone there knew this was a small miracle, worth more than any car or house. Arthur's sister grew more colorful, more alive. She was full of questions for everyone, filling the house with laughter. She started calling Gustavo uncle, and then, in a soft voice, began trying out dad, as if testing out something rare and precious. The first time, Gustavo froze, a strange glint in his eyes. He didn't say anything then, but sat with her on the porch, taking his time, counting the stars as they slowly appeared. Arthur got a new last name, too. When the paperwork was finally done, Gustavo put a hand on his shoulder and asked, "Are you sure this is what you want?" And for the first time, the boy answered without fear, heart wide open, "I do." Because now he had somewhere to belong. The house that had once been cold, full of silence and a luxury that didn't fill any emptiness, now breathed differently. Family photos on the shelf, sneakers left on the living room floor, the smell of fresh bread in the afternoon. Gustavo finally discovered what Arthur's mother had always said: true wealth is in what we share, not in what we keep for ourselves. In the neighborhood, everyone began to look at Gustavo with new eyes. Where they once saw just a distant businessman, they now saw a man who could cry over a sad story, who could say sorry and start over. Watching the kids play in the garden, people started to wonder what kind of miracle can happen when someone chooses kindness over pride. One afternoon, after a long storm, Arthur found his old backpack in the closet. It had been mostly forgotten, but he opened it anyway. Inside, his mother's work badge still gleamed despite the years. He took it out and hugged it tightly, and on his face you could see, it wasn't just pain anymore, it was gratitude too. Gratitude for the hard road that, in the end, brought him here. Gustavo walked in just then, pausing at the door, eyes wet and a smile he struggled to contain. They stood in silence for a few moments. Then he knelt beside Arthur and said, "She would be so happy to see you here." Arthur just nodded, and in that silence, it was as if the whole house breathed a sigh of relief. Time went by, and their story spread among the neighbors, among the house staff, even among people who barely knew them. Everyone wanted to know, how could a lost boy, a backpack, and an open heart change so many lives? And little by little, they started to understand. Miracles have no secrets, they only happen where compassion lives. And in that house, in that rebuilt home, everything slowly blossomed, as if every laugh, every hug, and every good memory was healing what pain had once broken.